So we just got back from Gage's wedding, your brother, my son, the 6th of 8 to get married. And it was really beautiful. We were all, we enjoyed it.
Wedding.
Traveled to Ohio.
It was awesome.
Beautiful setting, a lot of emotion. And it got me thinking. So here's the scene, all right? I'm pitching this movie to you.
Okay.
Here's the opening scene. We're kind of zoomed in, and
I'm gonna say yes.
Yeah,
Just go ahead.
Green light it. Boom. So there's the crowd assembled to observe the wedding, and the camera's slowly kind of pulling back to. We're going to slowly see the bride and groom, but you're seeing everybody's reaction, and you hear off screen, you hear the voices. I promise to love, honor, cherish you all the days of my existence. All the kind of vows. And you see people moved, the women are wiping tears from their eyes, and the men are smiling nostalgically, thinking about their own relationships. And you slowly pan back, and the first clue that something is different in this scenario is the line, until death do us part, is now until system failure. And then, it keeps pulling back, and you see, here's this beautiful, beautiful bride, handsome man, but their skin is kind of pallid and synthetic, and their eyes don't quite have there's just something kind of weird.
I might not greenlight this movie.
And obviously they're robots. And so let's say we're 50 years in the future, and this is a robot love story, because robots are making movies now too, I mean, they're sitting on the board of
It's a progressive cast.
Yeah. They're sitting on the green lighting committee at Walt Disney or whatever it is. And so they're like, well, we want our side represented too. And so why can't two robots marry each other? And for that matter, why can't a robot and a human marry each other?
That's like the Robin Williams movie.
Right. Bicentennial Man. I think it was something like that.
Yeah.
I might have said the plot. I haven't seen the movie, but so now there's some measure of resistance to this idea, because it just doesn't feel right to a group of people. And so the movie concludes with this impassioned speech, which I think is Bicentennial Man, basically saying, I'm human in every respect of appearance like you. I cry when I'm sad. I can run, I can eat. I don't know. I haven't seen the movie, but ostensibly an argument could be made that robots are going to be sophisticated enough, because interestingly enough, humans don't feel comfortable with a purely robotic figure that looks like a robot. Mm-hmm. Our quest is to make them look as much like us as possible. We're doing the work on that skin to not look so synthetic. We're doing the work on, Boston Dynamics and all of these things to have as fluid of a gait, in how they walk and move, to be able to pick up something with sensitivity and dexterity that mimics human qualities. And if it grabs this and squeezes and breaks the iPad, that's not a human, that's a robot who doesn't have the touch. And so everything right now in robotics is to make it as human as possible. And everything in AI is to mimic human intelligence and human conversation as much as possible. And as these things begin to fuse, I'm saying this 50 years in the future. As a kid, I watched the Jetsons and thought, this is amazing. There's the robot moving through the house as the maid. And Elon Musk is promising a consumer level version of this robot that for now looks mostly like a robot, black and white and high tech and cool. But everyone wants to get to the point where somehow we have produced something that is indistinguishable from humanity. Mm-hmm. And part of that is that they would have the sophistication to make their own argument, if we're indistinguishable, Why deny us human freedom, privilege, status, etc., including let me make my vow to my partner until system failure? So I don't know that that's actually 50 years away. That may be 10 years away, 20 years away. And now I'm on the beginning of the Jetsons future that I loved as a kid, and I'm thinking, how do we know when we're crossing lines? Because the lines are more and more becoming harder and harder for people to see or be willing to acknowledge. You already have humans loving in weird ways. I mean, I remember this bizarre story of a human guy talking about his intimate relationship with a dolphin. I mean, these are weird things. That's outright bestiality. But forming unusually intense connections with non-human figures. Mm-hmm. And we're calling it all love. And we're saying if it is love, anyone who's opposed to love is a bigot. And now the robots are getting in on the game.
Yeah, well, that's maybe where it would get tricky to even the most ardent liberal postmodernist type of intellect would struggle with something like that. But I think
why do you say that? I mean, you'd be hard as you characterized it, the most ardent, mm-hmm. Hardened postmodern liberalist. Mm-hmm. I don't see any capacity for boundaries there.
I mean, it's true that it's hard to find boundaries there because the general idea. I mean, I feel like the word postmodernism was a more obscure philosophical term, and now it's more in a part of common parlance. But in case someone doesn't know, the basic idea that fuels what's called postmodernism is that in this philosophical tradition of thought that became the Enlightenment period, and that was the period of modernity, and now we're in this period that's called postmodernity relative to the body of human thought that accompanied it. Now we're in this period where we have technologically and philosophically emerged from the Industrial Revolution, and we're looking around at what's paradise by most metrics in terms of the reduction of global poverty and the access to medical services and the internet and all of these techniques of globalization. So it allows us to think allows me not to just think, what's it like living in Missouri, or what's it like living in even America for that matter. I can think, what is it like to be a citizen of the globe? And in order to do that, I have to put aside my American preconceptions and my Missourian preconceptions, and then even my individual preconceptions, and just say, we're all in this together. And so the only story that unites us has to be, by necessity, this story of to each their own. This, you think what you think, I love that for you. I think what I think, and you love that for me, right? Because then we're on the same team. This is great. We can make this
right
work.
Because what you just said is actually the removal of
a boundary,
of many stages of lesser boundaries.
Yeah,
I'm not identified by the city I live in, by the state I live in, or the country I live in.
Right.
I am a global citizen of humanity.
Right.
And so ostensibly it's positioning a higher good by the removal of many lesser goods.
Yeah, and you have to remove the boundary lines, because then otherwise it is bigoted for me to say, well, I like what they're doing over in Australia, to pick a country, but that's maybe not the right way to do it, because in America this is how we do it. So for me to make any type of a value claim, or to have any type of a judgmental attitude, would imply that I am not multiculturally sensitive enough.
And that word multicultural. So from my generation, I'm Gen X, from my generation and prior, the big American idea, the appeal of the American idea, the thing that made America the country that everyone wanted to come to, was not multiculturalism, but the idea that America was a melting pot of cultures.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, we received the tired, poor, huddled masses from all over the world yearning to be free.
Mm-hmm.
And they came here and they traded their boundary. I'm an Irishman, I'm an Italian, I'm a this, that, or the other. They retained it at some level, but they traded it for the privilege of being an American. And so they may be an Italian American, an Irish American, but they put more emphasis on the American because we were a melting pot of cultures.
Mm-hmm.
But postmodernism has made it no, this just happens to be a landmass with a body of laws that is primarily about the Irish and the Italian and the Germans and the Russians and the Jews and the Arabs and everyone is more concerned and interested in defending their but that kind of works against the argument a little bit, though, doesn't it?
The logic is twisted. It's hard to really accept it with finality because it's so nebulous. But the fundamental philosophical postmodern claim is there is no such thing as an objective narrative.
Right.
Everything is subjective, down to even what you perceive to be the narrative.
Well, that is why, in terms of multiculturalism, you can't place a value on one culture being better than another. Everyone gets to claim and enjoy their culture. Yes, we sacrifice chickens and drink their blood, and we scar our children ritually with symbols of the gods we worship. But that's a beautiful culture. And who are you to say otherwise? And even what once would look at this and say, well, no, that's kind of barbaric, or that's wrong, or that multiculturalism has in a postmodern context, multiculturalism has erased all value judgment of the distinctions of any culture as to whether or not they are ultimately favorable and good in an objective sense for everyone's right to have that culture. And yet, even that is subservient to this idea that we're all global citizens. And that's part of how that pressure weighs down on this. We can't be that if we're casting judgment on these different value systems.
Yeah, it's an interesting application of the scientific theory of relativity, but now it's applying socioculturally. I can only make a relative value judgment to where you are because of my position.
Right.
And somebody can do that to me, and I apparently wouldn't want that to happen to me. So then when I do that to someone else, that becomes a problem.
Right.
But
So it's this weird inversion of judge not lest you be judged.
Yeah.
Because we're all triangulating positions out of the pressure to accept every position, or my position won't be accepted. And so every position becomes normal.
Yeah. Well, in the wake of that, we get these non-governmental organizations that somehow are the arbiters of non-judgmental multicultural values, but they are giving you black and white dictums of what to do.
Right.
Like you have to reduce fossil fuel emission. You have to have net zero carbon emission. You have to be fully up to date on your shots. You have to but you would think, well, if that's a non-governmental entity and it's a postmodern judgment-free zone, then why would they be telling me to do anything? Why wouldn't they just be patting me on the back when I do whatever I want to do?
Yeah, I think I don't know that this is accurate. The philosophers and sociologists would say this is accurate, but I am seeing the progression a little more clearly in terms of the Enlightenment and modernism retained tribalism as what we would now say as a racist basis for imperial aggression. So modernism permitted European nations to think they were superior in their culture and therefore to rape and ravage other less developed cultures.
Right, like that is why America is here.
Right. And so the progression of that in the trajectory of human enlightenment came to realize much of that was so unjust, but you can't parse that too much, or you retain a fundamental racism that needs to be disbanded entirely. And so we can't have tribalism. or the assertion that one culture has moral qualities superior to another. And that begins to pressure us into multiculturalism. And multiculturalism was advanced in the same time as the move from modernism to postmodernism. And part of that was modernism was fundamentally and naively optimistic about the future. It was, hey, all of this technology, and we're going to get better and better. We're doing things that history has never witnessed. The cotton gin, the sewing machine, at one time, the famous story, in the 1800s, the U.S. Patent Office considered shutting down because it didn't think that anything else could be invented. Everything had been invented that could be invented. It was such a time of wild innovation. And
I just love to see like guys like, well, Bob, I think we did it.
Yeah.
I'm ready to hang my hat.
Right.
That's the last of them.
And then you got World War I and World War II, and that optimism came crashing down. This isn't leading to global peace. And so now you're dissecting, well, what are the ingredients that have left us vulnerable? And we still have tribalism and cultures in conflict. So how can we aspire to be a national and international community, a global community? Well, that means the tribalism that was subsumed by multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is still admitting there's differences. And now we need to be a part of a human race. Right. In which there are no differences.
Right. That's what it's moving toward, is we can get to the point where we're not colorblind. It's like I actually fully perceive you for all of your differences, but I also magically don't treat you like that at all, except to the degree that you want me to. And then I am doing that perfectly, but only because I know that you want me to, and then I'm not doing anything else you don't want me. So it's really this magical act of superposition for every relationship, even just a casual encounter.
It's that superposition. I'm assuming you're making a quantum reference there.
It's all probability.
We're all in an on-off state at any time for anyone we meet, and they are with us, and so nobody has an identity. Nobody has an individual personality. It's all being subsumed in the Star Trek sense into the Borg. We're all being brought into a collective hive mentality of worker bees around the Queen's regiment of a globalist agenda.
Well, because that's what would be the totalitarian state. It would be when we're just dissolved into the worker. We know what our task is and we don't question it. And the point is we aggregate it to the mother. And that's what we're looking at.
At one time, there was an inferior version of that called communism that was recognized as an evil because from the moment you were born, you were taking an aptitude test, and you only fit into certain categories. You'll never be other than a plumber. But you could be an Olympic gymnast. So the collective is deciding your fate. There's no personal incentive or individual distinction. And that was recognized, at least in the West, among free societies, as a great evil. And yet the narrative has shifted in a globalist conversation where now we're just doing different forms of that. We aren't there yet, but we're creating the story. This is so interesting because we've been maintaining that a story is essential to a perspective and the conclusions you draw from that perspective. And you can't have that without a story. The globalist agenda is creating a narrative around the idea of how do we finally solve these monumental problems. Modernism failed us. It didn't produce the utopia it promised. All our world came crashing down. We're in postmodern doubt, and we're skeptical about everything, but there's still this promise, the apple dangling from the tree, the technology, if we just get it right, could finally save us. There was a story that just came out, a mother whose son was afflicted. I don't even know the name of the disease, but she went to multiple doctors for 10 years and could never get a diagnosis that helped her son. And AI solved it within.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Instantly they had an answer to give him relief. That's utopia. That's a promise of divine order that is human crafted. We don't need God anymore for divine order, because we're actually creating a substitute that we can feel good about, because the idea of God makes me quite uncomfortable, because that presupposes and imposes a system beyond my ability to control and dictate my own outcomes and my own ethic and value system. So now that narrative is driving us to a different kind of communistic ideal, a different kind of social order, and where we once had the ability to say, I don't want that future. I don't want, just because you can guarantee me a job in a communist society doesn't mean I want to shovel coal for the rest of my life. But the nature of technology and AI and the new kind of global idealism is producing a hive mentality and a drone class to the higher good.
Yeah, the mechanics at the individual level are definitely relevant, but I think I want to try to take what we're talking about at the abstract and then come to the individual. Yeah. But the main problem of postmodernism and the globalist zeal, and even the comical example of a robot is marrying a human. So who's to say that that's not love, or right. Why would that not be a celebrated thing?
Right.
Well, so because we would look at that and say, because that's not love. Like that, right. That would just be as simple as it is.
But that's your European background,
exactly.
Ancient assumptions based on blah, blah, blah.
Well, yeah, that's because you'd be saying, oh, if you don't toe the party line, then you must be coming from a cultural bias that is influencing your perception of reality.
Yeah.
So, okay, like if that's what you want to call it, that's fine. That I'm still right that's not, there's no such thing as a human loves a robot. Like you could use that word, but it goes into the semantics. What dictionary are you using? What does love actually mean?
Right.
Can the robot actually do that? You have to have these deeply philosophical conversations, but you can't actually have a conversation with somebody unless you're agreeing on the language that you're using.
Right.
Okay, here's the funny.
Love has to have a definition.
Yeah, but here's an example of the problem of just easy miscommunication. So if on my way here this morning, if I texted you and said, there's a big accident on the highway, I ran into it, I'll be there soon. Like, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. You ran into it.
But okay, so yeah, I ran into it. So you're thinking of a traffic accident on a highway. When I say I ran into it, you can assume that you know what I mean. But was I in the accident?
Right.
Did my car run in? When I ran into it, am I in the car and I
right.
drove into it? Did I encountered it, but I'm safe? Did I get out of my car and physically run into it?
Yeah.
But what is it?
Yeah.
Where is the accident?
Right.
What is into that?
Yeah.
Like, if you really want to talk about exactly what do I mean, those words are way too vague and it's way too open to interpretation. But if we have good faith between us, you're like, I get what he's saying. He ran into an accident, he'll be here soon.
I read between the lines.
Yeah, and you can be comfortable with what you don't know because you get the gist of what I'm saying.
Right.
So that's what a hierarchy is. You're saying, I get what he's pointing to, and I don't have to understand all the nuance.
Right.
I get the point.
Right.
But when you're talking about really significant things like philosophical concepts that are very weighty and are very nuanced, it really
which
matters.
Civilization is built.
So it really matters how we phrase it. Like, it matters what our law says to the word, to the letter of the word. Is that word capitalized? Like, it really, really matters, all of these things. And they're not pedantic and they're not merely semantic. This is where our deepest beliefs come from. And we have to understand that those are justifiable. Because if they're not, we need to be uprooting them or at least reconsidering where that's coming from. So the postmodern critique is relevant there when it says, what exactly does this word mean? Where is it coming from? How are you using it? That's relevant. But in the same way that construction can be, you can unhelpfully construct something.
Right.
You can unhelpfully deconstruct something. So a lot of postmodernism is unhelpfully deconstructive because there's nothing that is re-emerging from that place.
Right.
We're just being like, look, I can tear that down.
Right.
But you don't actually know what that's doing, and you don't know how to make it better. So
Right.
that's not helpful.
It's anarchist in a sense, in that it's just a scorched earth policy to unravel and destroy previous values without a replacement.
A white man built this, tear it down.
Yeah.
It's like, well, maybe we actually need that.
Right.
So if a white man built it, does that mean carte blanche should get torn down?
Right.
Or does it mean we ought to understand what its function is? So that means we really do have to understand it before we can even critique it.
Right.
And so I think there's too many people, like on Twitter, for example, that because they have a Twitter account, they're like, I can critique. I'm a social critic.
Right.
Unless you really, really understand what you're critiquing, then you're not a critic.
Okay, so in bringing this down, we are agreed around this idea. History has a trajectory, and we've moved from a modern, optimistic, but tribal and racist, in many ways, history. But there were also significant global advances that came from those same cultures that also had racism. So you can't throw the whole thing away. There's a mixture of good and bad there that is moved from modernism to a crashing, skeptical postmodernism, and tribalism becoming multiculturalism, and multiculturalism becoming globalism, and definitions are getting erased, and there's a scorched earth policy towards anything that could be labeled patriarchal, or imperialistic in its roots in any shape or form. And yet, to your point, words convey ideas, and language creates culture.
Yeah.
And so this was part of Orwell's argument in taking the dictionary, removing certain words. How can you have a rebellion among free-minded people resisting oppression if the word liberty isn't in their vocabulary? There's no word to convey the abstract idea of freedom. How do you think about freedom without using that word?
Yeah, like so many people today claim to have anxiety. So what if we just did at the governmental level, that's not a word.
Right.
There's no concept for that.
Right.
You're excited.
Right.
Now you're no longer allowed to say you're anxious. So like, what if you really are anxious, but now you don't have the word to articulate that accurately?
Yeah, because it's not just that we take it away among people who already know it. It's that 2 and 3 generations later, the word doesn't exist.
Yeah, you have to rediscover it.
The concept it contains doesn't exist. And so they're trying to define this angst. Well, we remove that word too.
Yeah.
And so you go down the list of synonyms and they're all gone. And my head hurts. Hurt isn't a word that you are allowed. So by controlling the language, we control the ideas. And by rewriting the words, redefining them, we funnel the people into thought systems that we approve.
Yeah, and there is a direction to that. So and this is where we're like, we have a direction and they have a direction.
And increasingly, those are opposite directions.
Yes. So what I think we've been saying all along the way is you can't perceive the world outside of a narrative structure. There is some story that's orienting you. That's how you have any ethical judgment whatsoever. Even to say, I am not judging you. You are still deciding that you could, but you shouldn't. So there's an ought statement in there. There's a story that guides you. Physiologically, there's the dopaminergic behavior that motivates you. There's that reward incentive. I'm sitting there playing video games and I want to keep doing that because it's making me do this. I want to go on a run. I'm motivated to go out into the world by the narrative that underpins my thoughts in a way that I'm not sitting around and thinking about. It's just happening behind the scenes, almost autonomously. But then it motivates me to go into the future, which is an act of faith. I am hoping and believing that when I do this, it will be better for me in the future. So that's why I'm in the present going this way. So you're still future oriented by the ethical framework justified by your narrative. And then I wrote down that, if I could just read my handwriting, when you get down on your luck and really the easy example of that now is the mass poverty that's happening on a really frightening scale when you consider how that really shouldn't be a problem. So politics aside, a lot of folks are. I was at the bank yesterday. Respectable older guy is just there saying, "Hey, I can't afford groceries. I can't work. I need a credit card." Literally just telling the institution, "I won't even be able to pay this back. I just need a line of credit that I'll never pay back because I can't get groceries." Heartbreaking. And to me, I was just going to the bank, and so I'm just thinking, how that did not used to be something you would casually overhear. That would be like in a hushed tone, like, "I'm so embarrassed," and maybe you wouldn't even go to the bank. But it was just like, this is how plain people are about it these days. It's like, well, I don't know what the hell's gonna happen, but I know I can't eat, so I just need a credit card.
Yeah.
Just gotta eat.
Yeah.
So what's the solution to that? Well, we're gonna need a story. We're gonna need a story for a better future, right? That's gonna explain how do we ameliorate our present day suffering. So now this magical solution appears from government, and the idea is bigger government.
Right.
This will solve the problem. It's going to help you motivate your behavior into the future. It's going to be a solution to your lack of faith. It's going to justify your ethical framework, and we're just going to help. Like, what did you say that one time that was like, "I'm for the government, I'm here to help you"? Those are the words you should have.
Ronald Reagan said these are the 9 scariest words in the English language.
Yeah. So there's these techniques of like, our health is constantly in jeopardy. We have poverty on a global scale that seems to be worsening with inflation and all of these wars and proxy wars. And along comes this pseudo-messianic globalist zeal that ameliorates your problem at a practical level of finances, at a physiological level of, I'm laying in bed and I'm depressed, but now I have something I can get up and do. And the fact that this narrative is emerging to provide a promising future in a postmodern context should mean that this narrative is only justifying subjective nihilism.
Yeah.
Like, it's just whatever you want to believe and everything else is pointless.
Yeah.
But no, this narrative has a good and evil message to it. The world is dying. We can save it. You have to act this way.
Right.
That's a good and evil structure. Like, that is the fundamental structure of a narrative. But how can that be, how does that fit in with the postmodern ethos that there is no such thing as an objective narrative? But somehow it's almost like horseshoe politics. Extreme postmodernism has now aligned itself with extreme authoritarianism, which is like, you have to believe that the world is going to die. You have to believe we're literally going to burn. And you have to do something about it right now. Otherwise, you are the problem.
It's striking me as you're saying that. Take the climate argument as one of many globalist arguments. Mm-hmm. Temperatures are heating. A big one, yeah. The whole Earth is going to become a burning inferno, and so it's a secular narrative of get out of hell. You know, how do you avoid going to hell? Yeah. Because we're making the earth a living hell. Yeah. And so these secular narratives often gain resonance because they mimic spiritual themes. And somehow what's lost in the shuffle of the conversation you are having is if the federal governments of the nations of the earth are failing in so many respects to take care of their people, why do we think that we can just elevate the government to an international coalition of all of these same politicians and power players and somehow achieve a better solution?
They're just changing their names.
But the idea is we still have too many boundaries among lesser issues. And we need to redefine boundaries to the ultimate. And those are the only boundaries, and everything else becomes a non-issue that somehow creates peace by the lack of conflict by removing all lesser boundaries.
But somehow that's justified. Like somehow that doesn't actually require doublethink. Yeah, that's just the facts. Like this is just look for yourself. Here's what the world's on fire.
Right.
You don't even have to question that. You should just assume the world is on fire.
So now getting back, because I started with a narrative, and that's part of what makes this question interesting, is the reason that the camera's panning back and we see is because we already know the story that creates this setting. two people fall in love. At some point they come together and they choose of their own free will to forsake all others and pledge theirself only to this person. So hearts are stirred in this setup because there is an underlying assumption of the story that's driving this. And where the cognitive dissonance sets in is by the time we step back and we realize, wait a second, the ancient story we thought we knew we were about to be given is really got a new twist on it.
Yeah.
A decidedly postmodern twist.
Yeah.
Robot love.
Yeah.
And yet, the MacGuffin is the setup. We're 30 seconds in, we have 6,000 years of the assumed story that's driving that moment.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So how do we argue that this is just another evolution of the power of love?
Well, I like the idea of trying to steelman the case and be like, how can this actually be good for somebody? But I just don't think there's a very good case to be made for why.
Well, let me try.
Okay. Good luck.
I
will be generous.
Yeah.
Good luck.
No. Why did you marry your wife? You were attracted to her beauty, her wit, her laughter. She made you feel things that somebody else didn't.
This is all true.
And you did the same for her. You shared experiences. You got to know each other, and at some point you realized, I can't live without them. But break that down further. That's the story we can all realize. But break that down further. You're just a bag of chemicals and blood and bones. And she's just a bag of chemicals, blood and bones. And you have the ability to interact in your physical environment, but those things are predicated and conditioned by how you were raised, stimulus, experiences you've had along the way that have formed response mechanisms. And at a certain level, and the secular materialist could look at that as a mechanistic, atomistic programming. You're algorithmically conditioned over the course of your life to look at her and go, I like that. And she was atomistically conditioned over the course of her life. And yes, you maybe could have been interested in others, but you were more interested in one another because of certain biological responses at a chemical, neurological level.
Like maybe if we knew enough, we could say, oh, there's 1,000,000,001 reasons why that happened. And here they all are. So that's what the love is.
Right.
It's just the math working.
Right. And so a robot is nothing if not math. And so if the AI is sophisticated enough, it's just another kind of algorithmic programming. If the robotics is sophisticated enough, it's just another kind of framework. The skeleton is metal instead of calcium based. The joints are, silicone and oil ball bearings instead of ligament and tendons. But you have a proxy, you have an analog to humanity. It does at some point wear down and terminate. And if the algorithms are sophisticated enough, let's say 20 years in the future, those robots are programmed so that there is the equivalent of neurotransmitters. It feels fatigue in that its battery level has dropped to a certain point. It has to go into a slow mode. It feels anxiety if it perceives certain sensory data that suggests there's a threat. And so what's to say that those aren't legitimate emotions? What's to say that those legitimate emotions aren't essentially human? Because again, we're trying to make the robots more and more like us. So at what point can we say, well, we've actually succeeded? They're made in our image now. And if they're made enough in our image, then why isn't that love? And why shouldn't they be afforded the privileges of humanity?
Yeah, we're getting to that fine line between anthropomorphizing and ascribing genuine spirit and life to something. I mean, like when I mean, if I have this beautiful old 67 classic muscle car and I take a bat to it, there's going to be people that appreciate that at such a level that they would literally wince or just get angry and be like, why, what are you doing?
Right.
Why? They would have an emotional response to that.
Right.
Which is obviously there's not a drop of life in that thing. But the point is they appreciate it to such a valuable degree that they're personally upset that I'm taking a bat to it.
Right.
Maybe more than they would be upset if I took a bat to a bird.
Right.
That I saw.
Right.
So one of them is alive and breathing and one of them is a machine, but
Right.
it depends on what you value.
Right.
So we would have to be willing to say, I value what is alive and I'm not convinced by the simulation.
Okay, so that, I think, the simulation, no matter how sophisticated, is still a simulation.
Yeah, it's miming, basically.
Right. No matter how sophisticated, it's still miming. So as the camera pans back and it looks human, and I went through the synthetic looking skin, the eyes, all of that, but let's strip that away and let's say you can't look at them and not think they're human. By all appearances, we have reached that point where the skin is organic and not synthetic, and the eyes do have a little spark behind them that doesn't look dead in the way that things do now. Okay, so now we're at ease in our hearts because it looks sufficiently like us and acts sufficiently like us. But now let's start that same movie with some vengeful lover coming with a flamethrower and they burn that skin off. And underneath, they're obviously metallic and robotic. And all of a sudden, the value system for the simulation shifts. And we are obviously looking at two metal creatures that are not alive by any definition of life, but they so successfully simulated life that for a moment we bought into it and we were moved.
That would be a good movie if that was the end of it. And
Right.
it's like a you don't know what's up the whole time. You just think it's a love triangle story, but then
And a
at
jealous
the end,
lover.
and then at the end, it's finally exposed. Like that's the great reveal is that this is
Right.
actually a machine. And then
Right.
it's up to the person to decide, do I love the human or do I love what was exposed to be a dead machine?
Right.
Because what would you choose at that point? You have all the memories and the connections and the emotion and the intimacy. And what if it's exposed that it's a sham?
We're talking about romantic love right now, but the second Terminator, where the big plot twist is Arnold comes back as a good T9 or whatever it is. He's a protector robot now, looks fully humanoid. He's not the metallic beast that tried to kill everybody in the first machine, and so he is protecting John Connor with absolute resolute loyalty, taking the bullets for him, defending him at all cost, and by the end dying to preserve the future and protect John. And you hear the mother's voiceover commenting on the irony that this robot was more of a father to her son than any human had ever been. Well, what defines the relation? Now we're back to words, ideas, concepts, the language and culture that result. What defines a father? We would say the very things he provides, he protects, he guards. But we have to dig deeper, because if it's merely the action and the function that defines, then why can't a robot be a father? Why can't a nanny robot in the future, a nanny nurse of the future, appropriately stroke the baby so they have touch in the nursery at the hospital and hold them and rock and sing with a human voice? What you said, I don't remember the exact phrase, but you just said what is lacking is a spirit of light and spirit. You used mystical words, spiritual words.
Oh yeah, talking about like why it's not alive.
Right.
Yeah.
Light, spirit. What happens when two humans hug and there's an exchange of something that goes beyond physiology, biology, chemistry? When I embrace my wife, I feel her heart beating, and not just the muscle. I feel her heart. And that it is a uniquely human thing to be able to say, I feel your presence.
Mm-hmm.
I feel your spirit. These are things that radiate out from us invisibly, that are part of the divine spark, and they make us human. So if I hug a robot and it has an organ that's thump, 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 thump for the oil and lubrication going to its joints, am I going to feel the same thing if it mimics a human heart?
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to feel the warmth of their being, the light of their personality, the spirit? This is a spiritual thing. But how do you have a spiritual conversation when the idea of spirit has been reduced to biomechanics? Come on, answer it. All future hangs on this moment.
That was a good question. Thinking it didn't get reduced, I think it got discarded. You can't have a spiritual reality in a purely mechanistic framework. The way that I've heard this get talked about in several textbooks of mine and elsewhere is spirituality is a subcomponent of multiculturalism. So that's its compartment now.
Interesting.
So there's just
another little bullet point in the list.
Yeah, and so you don't want to discriminate against somebody for their religious orientation, just like you don't want to discriminate against somebody for any subcomponent of their identity. But that's always 10th on the list. That's never the first one, because it's really not that important, but it's on there. Like you never see at the end of that list sexual orientation.
Right.
That's always top 3.
Right.
But you never see religious affiliation at the top. And that's always like, don't forget about that.
Right.
It's there too.
Right.
But the point I was going to make is when there's this interesting, like, consequence of that type of framework, which is if we were to have a nun who was like honoring her obvious, like she's dressing different and it clearly embodies her beliefs, and so she's clearly talking about the Bible and is going to be very traditional, very conservative, all the things that would be just absolutely detestable in a white male such as myself. But we're talking about a white nun. There's something about it that's almost it's like it's niche. And it's like this protected
You need to
thing.
clarify that. You don't mean it would be detestable to you, but the assumed narrative about you as a white male.
Yeah. Yeah. Like if
you don't mean that nun would be detestable to you.
No.
You're trying to describe a certain kind of narrative
from the postmodernist perspective.
Right.
When a postmodernist liberal looks at me and sees
you just said it in a personal way that I wanted to make sure that people understood.
Yeah.
You were being ironic.
Yeah, I'm being ironic because if I am just being myself as a conservative white Christian,
right,
then that is inherently offensive to the postmodernist liberal type.
Right.
That's because I'm claiming to have objective values and there can't be objective values.
Right.
So this is as simple as it is. But then add on top of that I'm a European white male by descent.
Right.
And now it's like, great.
You're so screwed. You're just, you're discounted from the conversation.
Right. But were there to be a nun that had all of those same views, but was kind of keeping to herself in her convent and that's her life, then the postmodernist type can say, that's great. Right. That's a protected class. Right. We don't want to discriminate against her. She's staying in her lane and honoring her culture. Her tradition is valuable to her. I love that for her. Right. And she's not getting in my face about it.
Right.
except if she was going to run for politics.
Right.
But you know, she's never going to do that.
Right.
So like, that's awesome. I love that. I actually kind of am curious about that. You can just fetishize it.
Right.
But if I am bold about the fact that I believe the same thing she believes, and I would like to have a public conversation about that, and I would like to assert my objective values into the objective world, now that's like a wedge coming in.
Right.
You're going to be on one side or the other.
You're arrogant, you're bigoted, you're narrow-minded, you're intrusive, you need to learn your place in the wider world.
Right. So there are certain protected subcomponents of multiculturalism that are allowed to be out and loud and proud about it.
Right.
And then there are others that are like, we're not going to say it, but it's great that you're doing that very privately in your private community that doesn't have political ambition. That's great for you. So it is a problem to not be allowed to express an opinion unless you're coming from the like subjectively approved non-perspective.
Yeah, right.
You somehow have to only say what's already being said in just the right way. And
well, so I see where you're going in terms of that as a response to my question, but it's occurring to me that the argument I made before about those kind of ineffable spiritual qualities has, you know, the phrase "the ghost in the machine" is the traditional kind of philosophical conversation that the materialists have.
Yeah,
where
because that's what you were saying of reducing the spiritual to the biomechanical. I think is.
And so the ghost in the machine is that the idea that everything that we use ancient mystical language to describe is really the accidental byproduct of highly definable mechanistic processes that just ends up looking like a ghost, a spirit inside the machine.
Well, that's, I think, what they call the black box phenomenon of AI, where they're like, there's more than a billion parameters in this AI system, and we can't understand where all of its behavior is being generated from. So we just call that the black box, because that's like the void we can't see deep enough into.
The people that have produced it and created it now say, if I type in this question, or I can't predict what it's going to say, because it actually has so many parameters it's drawing off of. It has its own personality. Mm-hmm. It's not just an algorithm at this point that's generating a result. It is a conglomerate of unknown factors and data points.
But that's where it breaks down to me, because all the factors are known. No, there wasn't some magical potion that generated a code that they didn't know about. They coded the code that was told to code.
Right.
It's getting very lost in the process, but it is actually all coming from a known process.
Yeah, but it's so vast now that they legitimately can't say what it will say, because only it can tell them what that conglomerate results in.
Yeah, I just mean that all of those individual bricks that were laid by a person.
By people.
But then we found the way to tell the bricks, turn yourself into a maker of bricks and a layer of bricks, and then do that for me.
Right.
So now we have a tower that's building itself. And so we're saying, wow, that went really fast. Like, we had only really done this layer, and now it's up to here.
Right. And we don't know how it got there, but we do.
Yeah, we do, because we instructed it to do that.
But what we don't know is the shape of the tower it will build for itself.
Well, yeah, and we have no reason to believe that there would be something approximating a benevolent bricklayer.
Right.
It's going to be gathering unto itself the resources that it needs to accomplish the task as it understands it.
Yeah.
But we're still left with I guess, what spirit is animating it. But I don't like the whole ghost in the machine language, because I think it tries to separate the spiritual from the physical. Yeah. And I think if there is a spirit, then it's embodied in something.
Well, the ghost in the machine idea is really trying to dismiss or mock the idea that there is a spirit. Mm-hmm. It's not people saying, yes, there really is a spiritual dimension and humans are possessed of a distinct spirit. Mm-hmm. It is, no, that is all the illusion of what you call a spirit. That is simply the mechanistic byproduct of all the other.
Yeah. Look at us. We're just these electromagnetic meat bags. And
Right.
here we think that there's some thing animating inside of us that we have access to. So yeah, we're just purely the ones and zeros, numbers of our makeup.
Right.
And if we have anything going on inside of us that we can't account for, it's just because we don't know it well enough yet to label it.
Which is why it's hard to imagine that society could resist the inexorable logic of two other mechanistic beings eventually wanting to engage in the same social rituals that we do.
Mm-hmm.
If it's meaningful for us and they're made in our image and there is no ghost in the machine, there is just the appearance of that thing, and they have an equivalent appearance.
Yeah. Yeah, what if they did? What if it was literally you could not tell anymore?
Right.
There's literally no way to know. How would you tell somebody you ought not to marry that thing?
Right.
Because you're trying to say it's a thing. And they're saying, how?
Right.
How do you know it's a thing?
Right.
So I think ultimately it's still going to come down to the narrative. What is the story that tells me that's not a real person?
Right.
That is a thing.
Yeah.
That's what it would come down to. And that's why there would be that bifurcation, because they would say, I don't subscribe to that narrative. I don't like that theory. I look at something I love, and that's what I want to be with. So I would have to say, like, it would be like I have to agree to disagree, except when it gets political, because then we're going to be bound by that law.
Yeah, some of the best works on this, whether in literature or movies, whatever, they try to, they're studies of humanity, ultimately. Bicentennial Man, I don't know that if I watched it, that I would agree with the outcome, but the arguments he's making are meant to provoke thought about what makes a human or not.
Mm-hmm.
That Joaquin Phoenix, Her.
Yeah.
The one, I can't remember the name of it either, but where he has a relationship with a really sophisticated AI on his phone. The Steven Spielberg movie years ago, AI, with the little boy.
Oh, I didn't see that one.
Yeah. They're all ultimately trying to ask what makes a human human. The problem, as I see it, is you have the extreme end that we can all agree we don't want, the Matrix or Terminator. But most of the others, in trying to explore what makes a human human, imbue the robot with enough human-like qualities that it leaves it emotional and ambiguous, because we're so moved by their desire to be human. It's Data, the character Data on the Next Generation of Star Trek, where he so longs to understand, because he's so close. He's so close in every respect to being human, but he doesn't actually have the automatic responses in a certain situation. He has to calculate his way to that response. And so in the best and most confusing of the other movies, they actually have those responses. And so now, but the trick there is we're assuming that we really can produce something so like us that it becomes indistinguishable from us. And if we could, how do we any longer have any moral authority to say that's not human in its essential goodness and value?
Right. Well, Data is a good name for that character because it's one of those useful poetic embodiments of a greater societal problem where, like, the claim of empiricism is saying we just look at the data. And the data tells us what we believe. But you have the embodiment of data in this science fictional universe, but it doesn't know what to feel. It just knows what to think.
Wow.
So it's become so disconnected.
Can you even call that think? It just knows what to process.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, but it's just pure ones and zeros talking to itself. But then when I talk to myself, I'm thinking emotionally.
Right. Because
I can't not do that. So, but if you imagine a person that could, you still imagine the jealousy of, but I'm missing out.
Right.
You know, what is this experience that I don't understand? Or like when Spock sheds a tear and it's like, what was that? Like, where did that come from?
Right.
Am I wrong? Does Spock ever shed a tear?
There are a couple of episodes where he has emotional moments,
but he can't shed a tear.
No, it's like
I know we were going to get into it, but I don't want to be wrong about Star Trek.
No,
I just thought there was a time where he did and was surprised by it.
Right.
But so the imagery of that is like, what is this thing that's happening to me? Which wouldn't be possible if it was purely operating from a binary, then there's not going to be the opportunity for emotion, because there's no gray area. It still is always infinite black and white, ones and zeros.
Yeah.
So to have emotion means that there is some magical third component that provides the space for you to have genuinely gray area. And I don't think you would get... I just don't think we're going to find a solution to these questions, like a mutually agreed upon solution. What did you do?
Keep going. That's back to black.
Well, I can start over. That's okay. Let's do it again.
Well, it wasn't the way the automation was working. It wasn't because the automation starts from here. So now it will. Were you seeing out of the corner of your eye that it was going to it?
No, I wasn't paying attention.
I think it was just staying stuck on the 2 cam.
Right. So, but if you just run it in the way where the automation goes, we can just wait until it cuts, and I'll see that, and then I'll respond.
Yeah. I think if I start and manually switch over to main, then the automation can kick on.
Okay.
Yeah. So just go from there.
Oh, it's been recording the whole time?
But I'll let it to that point. So just give your data answer. That was great.
Data answer, okay.
So just start now.
I know. I got thrown off track, so I got to remember.
The character data is a good.
What's my motivation?
Yeah. Data is a good name for that character.
Data is a good name for that character, I think, because it's a good poetic embodiment in this science fiction universe. It's talking about the person that doesn't have emotion, whose name is data, because it's just the amalgamation of information, but so it can't feel emotion. But that's a good embodiment, I think, of empiricism and the problem of saying, I'm a modern atheistic scientist and I just let the data present to me what the story ought to be. And Peterson makes a great case here that that's actually not possible.
Right.
You always are using your ethic to discern what the data says to you.
But in a pristine kind of hypothesized scientific or sci-fi scenario, the idea that you could have unbiased data is highly valuable, because we all color our data with our cultural assumptions, our religious assumptions, this, that, and the other. If you could have a figure that's just processing immense amounts of data and giving you the objective fact of it, somehow that's cleaner, purer, or better.
Yeah, because, well, it is if you purely value rational intellectualism, like just this deracinated, unembodied form of binary processing.
Right, but you're polluted even in saying that, because you're drawing that out of certain convictions or assumptions, and you aren't just dealing with the data, and you're coloring the data. And so the data who doesn't color the data or interpret the data is somehow giving better information, because it's not tainted by human experience. And now we're back to, well, I don't want data as a dinner guest. I'm not going to have the same kind of encounter with someone who doesn't have human experience to relate to me out of.
Yeah, I just don't think we'll ever get, like, we as in society broadly, I don't think we'll ever agree on how we're going to make a value claim on something like this. We would at least have to agree deeper down than what that problem is representing. We would need to go several layers down and just say, what is it that makes us human? So I think what makes me human is being made in the image of God.
Right.
That's what I think it is.
Yeah.
Now, if someone disagrees with me on that, then I don't know how we could agree that a robot cannot become sufficiently human-like to deserve to have rights of its own.
Yeah.
Like, I think we'll see, like, if my hypothesis is right, we'll get to the point where we are legislating on behalf of machines.
Right.
We're protecting their ability to function and do certain things. In a weird, abstract way, that's already happening because Larry Fink's Aladdin is trading dozens of trillions of dollars of stock, and corporations are able to operate from a purely financial perspective. How can we make the most amount of money?
Right.
Which means they don't have to consider a purely human cost. It's like, if this is good for the business, which is that machine-like corporate soulless entity, then we're going to go in that direction, and we can lobby the government if it's not. There are these what's the word for it, like impetuses or motivations or mechanisms that are in place that are already prioritizing the machine-like progress of humanity, furthering our development of technology, integrating our technology to ourselves, becoming our cool versions of cyborgs, that it just makes us better humans because we're integrating more and more machinery into ourselves. So in that way, we are already legislating to the benefit of machines. We're kind of talking about, what if in this hypothetical world a machine is so human-like, so it's the other way around?
Yeah.
What are we going to do with that? So it's pretty easy to imagine we're not going to know what to do with that by the time we get there.
Right.
But you unless you're willing to make an objective claim that that's not my reality.
The objective claim, because it's not going to get clearer and clearer. It's going to get fuzzier and fuzzier.
Well, it's just going to get muddier until eventually there has to emerge some like hard right and left position. There won't really be room for nuance at a certain point. It's going to be like, well, you're a bigot if you think that a person can't fall in love with a robot.
Robot love, Hanson.
Yeah.
I feel the tear right here.
What if this person does? What if somebody that I care about tells me, I'm getting married and I want you to be there because I want to symbolize my union, and I know that it's with one of those Android things that are super cool and shiny now, and so why would I go to support that? Or would I have to be like, I love you but I don't love that, so yeah, I'm gonna take a position on that?
Yeah.
So it'll get to that point with maybe not with the marriage one, but it might be like, I've got a buddy that is he calls it his girlfriend.
Yeah.
And it's just a sex robot.
Right.
But it's like, that's my girlfriend. Right. And am I going to actually be like, dude, that's not your girlfriend?
Right.
Or am I just going to roll my eyes? Or am I going to be like, bro, we need to talk about this.
Right.
What's going on with you?
Right.
You can't be postmodernist and do that. At least you have to have your claim on what the truth is and where it's coming from, and you have to be willing to say that. So I love the point that Peterson makes about that, which he thinks that, like, his view that's really touched me is saying any type of like totalitarian state you want to talk about on the right side of the Nazis or on the left side of communism, that authority and terrible thing that they're doing is validated by every single person that's in the culture. They are all ratifying that incessantly, and that's why it's allowed to exist. Savannah and I were talking about this the other day, why there's so many McDonald's and fast food restaurants everywhere. Because there's demand for the product. Right. It's like, oh, the food's so unhealthy. We've seen Super Size Me. We've seen the burger that was saved for 20 years and nothing has gone bad in it. But I am kind of hungry, and it's pretty cheap, and it's right there. Exactly. So every single time that one of us goes and gives them our money, we are justifying their existence and increasing the demand for the product. And then it shows up down the street. And then you're like, well, it is convenient. Yeah. Well, it's cheap. Yeah. So we're the ones that are participating in the system. The system grows, and then we look up and go, I don't like that. Right. Unless you're taking full responsibility for everything that you did that got it there, then you're part of the problem.
Right. Well, that's a happy note to end on.
Yeah, it's a great note to end on. Tune in next week for
sadness and despair, our new future.